Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will keep showing you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. There are some people that no one in the neighborhood knows, but they know every child in the area. Kane was one of them. And if it weren't for my dog, Rex, I might never have had the chance to tell this story. The story happened when I was 12 years old. My family had just moved from Philadelphia to the small town of Tarrytown, New York. My dad got a job transfer, and my mom wanted me to grow up in a quieter environment. Our new house was white with a wide porch, but I didn't feel comfortable, probably because I was still new to the place. I had an absolutely loyal friend named Rex. He always slept in my room. The first night in the new house, Rex just lay quietly by the bed. A few days later, I was startled awake one night by Rex's growling. I was dozing off when Rex suddenly barked loudly. I sat up, startled, and looked around. Rex was staring intently at the dark corner near the closet and wouldn't stop barking. I turned on the light and went to check. It was just clothes that hadn't been neatly put away after moving day. I stroked Rex and whispered words of comfort. "You're just stressed because of the new place, right? It's going to be okay." Rex wagged his tail but still looked at the corner of the room with his ears perked up. Finally, I had to pull Rex up onto the bed to lie next to me. But throughout the night, every now and then, Rex would raise his head and let out a small growl before lying back down. The next morning, as I was helping my dad organize things in the garage, there was a knock on the front door. An elderly man stood at the door. "Hello, I'm Kane, and I've lived here for a long time." My dad shook his hand politely, as he usually did with new neighbors. "Thanks for coming by. We're still unpacking." "I just wanted to say hello and get to know the new family," Kane said. He glanced inside the house, then his eyes lingered on me for a long time. I stood behind my dad, feeling uncomfortable under his gaze. The next day was the weekend. My dad was mowing the front lawn, and my mom and sister had gone shopping for a few things. I was sitting in the backyard, enjoying the quiet while playing Pokemon. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I looked up and saw Kane walking into the backyard from a path on the side of the house. He was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dark blue overalls, looking like a real farmer. I frowned slightly. Kane didn't come through the main gate or knock on the door. He just entered my backyard without permission. Kane walked straight to the table where I was sitting and pulled up a plastic chair to sit across from me. "What are you doing?" His voice sounded friendly, but I felt uncomfortable with the way he was looking at me. I politely replied, "Playing a game." "What kind of game?" "Pokemon." Kane nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Ah, Pokemon. Pikachu." He imitated Pikachu's voice, but that action, coming from an elderly man like him, looked really strange. The laugh that came from his throat didn't sound like a happy laugh. It sounded more like the difficult breathing of a sick person. That's not how a normal adult would interact with a child. It was as if he was trying to pretend to be friendly, but didn't know how to do it right. I tried to focus on my game, hoping Kane would get the hint and leave, but he just sat there. Pika. He imitated it again, this time louder and longer. My dad appeared, still holding the lawnmower. "Oh, hello, Kane," my dad said, sounding surprised. "Son, come inside and help me with the dishes." I ran into the house, feeling a sense of relief. From the kitchen window, I saw my dad talking to Kane. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but my dad's posture showed he was not happy with Kane being in our backyard. The conversation was quite short, and then Kane stood up and left the way he had come, When my dad came inside, his face was very serious. "Son, did Mr. Kane come into the backyard without permission?" "Yes, he did." My dad frowned, his face darkening. "From now on, you are not to be alone near him. If you see him coming near, you have to tell me immediately." Hearing my dad's voice, I knew this was not a simple matter. A few days later, one night Rex woke me up again with a growl. This time Rex was standing close to the window, his nose pressed against the glass. I got out of bed with trembling legs, my heart pounding. I opened the window to see what Rex was reacting to. The cool night air blew into the room, carrying the smell of damp earth and dry leaves. "Pika, Pikachu!" The voice that suddenly rang out startled me. It was an old man's voice. "Pika, Pika, Chu." This time he tried to draw out the syllables. I slammed the window shut and ran out of the room as fast as I could. "Dad!" My scream echoed through the house. The door opened and my parents ran to me, looking panicked. "Kane is outside the window. I heard him," I yelled. My dad didn't ask any more questions. He rushed to the front door and ran out into the yard. I stood at the living room window, watching my dad run around the yard with a flashlight, checking every bush, every dark corner. But the yard was empty. There was no one there. The next morning, he went to the house next door and knocked on the door. An old woman opened it. "Sorry to bother you. Do you know anyone named Kane who lives around here?" "I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never heard of anyone named Kane," the neighbor replied. Her answer confused my family. My dad called the police immediately. The police came to the house, taking detailed notes on Kane's appearance, what he had said and done, and the time and location of each appearance. "We'll increase patrols in this area and check to see if anyone matches the description." After that, we never saw or heard from Kane again. Maybe that wasn't his real name. Maybe he left town when he found out the police were looking for him. Or maybe he was just a lonely man with strange habits. But I know one thing for sure. The man named Kane didn't come to get to know his neighbors. He came to find me. And if it weren't for my dad's quick intervention and Rex's vigilance, I don't dare to imagine what could have happened. I haven't played Pokemon in the backyard since. I've moved twice since leaving Cassville, but I still feel uneasy every time I see a police patrol car. My name is Donnie, 38 years old. After my divorce last year, I decided to move back to my family's old house in rural Cassville, Ohio. I thought a quiet place would help me find my balance again after my broken marriage. The house had been empty for almost 10 years since my mother passed away, so it needed a lot of repairs. That was good. It gave me something to keep my mind busy. I started with simple things: painting the walls, replacing the pipes, fixing the roof. But the thing I wanted to do most was build a privacy fence along the edge of the backyard, which bordered a dense forest. After finishing the work inside the house, I started digging holes for the fence posts. The soil was quite soft here, and I figured it would take about 3 days to finish the fence. That afternoon, while digging near the left side of the house, my shovel hit something hard. At first I thought it was a rock, but when I cleared away the surrounding dirt, I saw a curved, ivory-colored shape. It looked like a large piece of bone. I continued to dig and found more pieces. Probably deer bones, I thought, since there were a lot of wild animals in this area. But as I dug deeper, what appeared stunned me. It was a piece of a skull, I was sure of it, because there were eye sockets. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone to call the police. I reported what I had found. The dispatcher said an officer would be there to check it out soon. About 20 minutes later, only one officer arrived. He introduced himself as Sheriff Dalton. I led him to the backyard and pointed to the hole. Dalton looked down, didn't seem to think it was a big deal, and nodded. Probably a cow or a hunting dog. I pointed to the skull piece. He leaned down for a closer look, then stood back up with an unchanged expression. Trust me, I've seen a lot of things like this. Dalton offered to help me clean up, but I refused. I said I could handle it myself. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded and left. I hammered the posts into the ground as planned, and didn't bother to dig up the bone pieces anymore. They were already there anyway, and moving them would just be a hassle. The next morning, I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard a knock on the door. I was surprised to see Dalton standing on the porch. He was in plain clothes and holding 2 cups of coffee, smiling as if we were old friends. We sat on the front porch. Dalton talked about the weather and my house repairs. After a while of small talk, he asked, "Have you ever thought about selling the house?" The question was so unexpected that I stopped drinking my coffee. I just moved back here. I know, but this place is quite isolated. A single man like you might get lonely. Dalton paused, and I said nothing, still surprised. I could buy this house with cash, no complicated paperwork. I refused without thinking. Dalton was silent for a long time, sipping his coffee and looking out at the forest behind the house. Okay, but just think about it. Maybe you'll change your mind. As Dalton left, I stood at the window watching his car drive away. When the car turned onto the main road, I noticed red mud stuck to the wheel wells. It was the same kind of mud from my backyard. A sense of unease crept in. I went to the backyard immediately to check. There were tire tracks in the dirt. They were definitely from a car. I stood there, stunned for a while, filled with all kinds of suspicions and doubts. I spent the whole day thinking about the bones in the backyard and Sheriff Dalton's strange attitude. That night, I decided to call Jason, a college friend, who was now a forensic technician in Columbus. I told him about what I had found. I just said I didn't trust the local police. Jason agreed to drive down on the weekend to check the bone samples. Jason arrived on Saturday morning. I led him to the backyard and pointed to the exact spot of the hole. The surface of the ground was perfectly flat. I was already a little bewildered at that point. We started digging. From the very first shovelful, I felt something was different. The dirt was much harder than I remembered, as if it had been compacted with a machine. It took us almost 2 hours to dig down to the same depth as before. But to our surprise, there was nothing there, not a single piece of bone. I stood there, breathing heavily, with a shocked expression. Jason wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at me. "Donnie, stress from a divorce can make people see things that aren't there." I didn't know what to say. The bones were gone, but I was sure they had been there. I clearly remembered the chilling feeling on my skin when I touched the skull. I decided not to look into it any further. There was no evidence to back up my story. No one but me and Sheriff Dalton had seen those bones. And based on his strange behavior, I was certain Dalton was involved. A month later, I put the house up for sale. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every night I felt like someone was watching me from the forest behind the house. An elderly couple from Cleveland bought the house. They were retired and wanted a quiet place to live. I felt guilty watching them excitedly talk about their plans to garden in the backyard, but I didn't say anything. I just wanted to get out of there. One August afternoon last year, all it took was a faint knocking sound from an abandoned house to shatter all my beliefs. The perpetrator of the most brutal crime was the person I trusted the most. I'm Elton, the police chief of Sedona, Arizona. For over 15 years of serving here, I've always been proud of this small community. Everyone knows and trusts each other, and the most serious crimes are just land disputes or assaults from drunken fights. That afternoon, I received a call from a family who had just moved into the neighborhood. The woman's voice was filled with anxiety, saying there were strange noises coming from the abandoned house behind their home. The sound was like someone knocking on a wall. I drove my patrol car there. The abandoned house had been there for a long time. The former owner had died many years ago. With no heirs, it was just left to rot. I parked my car and walked into the yard. The weeds were knee-high, and the air was heavy with the smell of mold. I listened, but there was no sound. Maybe the family was mistaken. But as I was about to leave, a faint knocking sound echoed from below. I quickly grabbed my flashlight and some lock-picking tools from the car. I walked inside and felt the wooden floor creak beneath my feet. Searching the first floor, I discovered a secret door under the stairs, locked with a padlock the size of my fist. The strange thing was that the lock was brand new. I used bolt cutters to break the lock. The door opened, revealing a steep wooden staircase leading into the darkness. A strong, foul odor hit me, and I had to cover my nose. "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed down and disappeared into the silence. But then I heard a noise. I slowly walked down. A small room with a low ceiling and no windows gradually appeared. I was shocked to see 3 figures huddled in the corner, a woman and 2 children. All 3 were thin, like skeletons wrapped in skin. The woman looked at me with a look of disbelief. Then she crawled to my feet, grabbed my pants, and sobbed. "Please, please save us." I quickly sat down to comfort the woman. The 2 children, a boy and a girl, just looked at me with scared eyes. I immediately called for an ambulance. While waiting, I shined my flashlight around the room. The walls were covered with etchings. They had carved a line for each day that passed. There were also scrawled messages, pleas for help, and cries for rescue. A bucket in the corner served as a toilet. There were some old, rotting mattresses on the floor, a few cans of food and bottles of water. The medical team arrived and quickly took the woman and the 2 children away. I stayed at the scene with the investigation team. We found a notebook under a mattress. The yellowed pages documented the horror the victims had endured. The first page read, "My name is Leah Porter. Today is the first day I've been held here. If anyone finds this diary..." My mind immediately started racing when I read that line. Leah Porter was a girl who went missing 9 years ago when she was just 16. I had been part of that investigation. The case had been unsolved until today. I continued to read the following pages. She wrote about every day of her captivity, how she was kidnapped on her way home from school. She was locked in here and endured all kinds of physical and mental torture. The 2 children were the kidnappers. She tried to protect them, teaching them to read and write with charcoal on the walls. It was heartbreaking, and I admired Leah's resilience. While examining the scene, a sudden engine noise and a loud screech of tires drew everyone's attention. I looked and immediately recognized the car as belonging to Craig, my best friend. Craig got out of the car, his face as pale as if he had just seen a ghost. I was surprised and asked him what he was doing here, but Craig's eyes were fixed on the ambulance where Leah was being cared for. He stood there like a stone statue for a few seconds. I saw his hands trembling and he swallowed hard. Then he suddenly turned and ran. I had a bad feeling and ran after him, calling his name. Craig heard me calling and ran faster. I lunged and tackled Craig right in front of his car. "Why are you here, Craig?" He didn't answer. just looked at me with the eyes of a person caught red-handed. When I tackled Craig, a key fell out of his pocket. I handed it to an officer, and the key could open the lock I had just broken. In that moment, my world came crashing down. This abandoned house was only 2 blocks away from Craig's house. The key to the cellar was too new for the age of the house, and most importantly, Craig was the only person I had ever told about Leah Porter's disappearance 9 years ago. He once asked me why the police couldn't find anything. Now I knew the reason. Craig knew because he was the one who hid her. I wanted to punch my best friend, whom I had trusted for 20 years. But I just stood there trembling, watching Craig get handcuffed. I realized how wrong I had been. I had trusted Craig, invited him to my house often, and let him be close to my daughter. I considered Craig my brother, while he was torturing a high school girl and 2 children just a few miles away. In the interrogation room, Craig admitted everything. He confessed to stalking Leah for months before kidnapping her, using the abandoned house as a place of confinement. DNA evidence confirmed he was the father of the 2 children. Leah's diaries, secretly taken photos, and personal belongings found in Craig's house solidified his guilt. With undeniable evidence, Craig was charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment. Sitting there, reading his statement, I felt suffocated. It took me a long time to sign the arrest warrant for my best friend. I sat in my office for a long time, feeling empty. I still couldn't believe what was happening. Craig is now awaiting trial. Leah and her 2 children are receiving medical and psychological care, slowly learning how to live again. As for me, I'm still the police chief of Sedona. But every night, as I patrol the quiet streets I once believed I knew so well, I wonder how many other secrets are hiding behind closed doors. I'm Jake, a 26-year-old born and raised in Montana. From a young age, I've been fascinated with exploring the wilderness. Alaska was always a dream of mine, the last great frontier. Last October, I decided to take my dream trip to the Brooks Range near the town of Coldfoot, Alaska. That morning, I carefully drove my adventure bike on the slippery road. My breath formed white clouds in the cold air. I had checked the weather forecast. The snow was supposed to stop in the afternoon. Everything was going smoothly. I felt pretty confident in my skills. Around 10 a.m., I was driving at 30 miles an hour around a gentle curve on the side of a mountain. The snow was still falling steadily. Snowflakes stuck to my helmet visor. I was just thinking about stopping for a break when I suddenly saw something move. A huge black mass slowly came out of the bushes on the left side of the road. At first I thought it was just a large log rolling down, but then I realized it was moving at a steady pace. It was a huge brown bear. The bear continued to walk into the middle of the road. I reacted immediately. I slammed on the brakes. The motorcycle started to slide uncontrollably on the ice. I completely lost control of the bike. I just closed my eyes and braced for impact. There was a loud crash. I felt myself fly off the seat. My head hit something very hard. Everything quickly went dark. I don't know how long I was out. Pain. That was the first feeling when I opened my eyes. I was lying face down. I tasted the salty, metallic flavor of blood on my lips. I couldn't move my left arm. My right leg hurt. I guessed it was broken. I looked around. I saw my bike lying on its side a few yards away. Then I heard breathing. It was heavy and raspy. I turned my head to the right. My heart stopped. The giant brown bear was lying pretty close to me, next to my bike. Its hip was bleeding. It lifted its head and looked at me. Its dark brown eyes were full of annoyance. The bear's growl woke me up. I had to figure out what to do. Okay, Jake, here's the situation. I'm hurt. The bear is hurt, and we're both grumpy. Don't move quickly. Absolutely not. I had read somewhere that bears can run faster than a horse, even though this one didn't look like it could run right now. Slowly, very slowly, I tried to crawl backward toward a rock a few feet away. Every time I moved, the bear looked at me with a watchful eye. And then I realized. The bear was crawling after me. It tilted its head. It occasionally panted. My leg hurt. Its hip hurt. We were both crawling and staggering. Cold sweat started to pour down my face. Every time the bear growled, I stopped and imagined it getting up and pouncing on me. I thought, is this where I die? My family will probably write on my tombstone, Jake died from not paying attention while driving. Just as I reached the rock, a car horn sounded in the distance. Both the bear and I turned our heads. A pickup truck stopped. A big man jumped out and yelled, asking if I was okay. I tried to talk about the bear. My voice was hoarse. He helped me get into his truck and drove me to the nearest hospital. Once I was safe in the truck, I looked back and saw that the bear was no longer moving. I figured it must have broken its ribs. On the way to the hospital, I contacted the rescue service. I borrowed the owner's phone and called the local emergency number to report the location of my adventure bike. I also reported the injured brown bear so they could contact the wildlife agency. The doctor diagnosed me with a broken leg, a mild concussion, and a torn muscle in my right thigh. Luckily, there were no serious internal injuries. The next day, the rescue team called me to say they had retrieved my bike and gear. But there was no trace of the brown bear. I couldn't help but worry about the fate of the brown bear. After all, it was my fault. My name is Jimmy. I've been a night shift receptionist at the Riverside Motel for 3 years. It's a small motel on the highway, located in the middle of a small town called Millbrook, Ohio. In Millbrook, everyone knows each other. Rumors spread faster than the wind. Our town is so small and peaceful that a stranger might think time moves slower here. Wooden houses line the quiet streets. The Miller's family grocery store has been here since 1952. On Sunday mornings, after church, everyone gathers at Miller's Diner. They drink coffee and chat. The Riverside Motel, with its cozy rooms overlooking the river, mainly serves travelers, but sometimes it also becomes a place for private dates. Dr. Richard Morrison was one of the most respected people in our town. For many years, he ran a family clinic and took care of everyone's health. Richard was on the church board and donated to the local school. His wife, Susan, taught piano to children and ran a book club. They had 2 daughters and were the perfect model of a family. So I was quite surprised when I started seeing Richard show up at the motel one night. The first time was a few months ago. He was holding hands with a young woman. I was impressed by her standout blonde hair and her bright red dress. When I gave him the room key, Richard looked me straight in the eye. I understood what he was trying to tell me. I just nodded politely and pretended to be busy with paperwork. From then on, they became regulars. Every time he left, Richard would leave a $100 bill on the counter. I took the money with mixed feelings. A little bit of disappointment to see someone I once respected do something like that. But it wasn't my business. And honestly, I couldn't say no to that money. Everything changed when a new colleague named Marcus started working. Marcus was young, full of energy, and not from our town. "She's hot," Marcus whispered to me when he first saw Richard and the girl walk in. "My God, the old man with her must be really rich." I warned Marcus to watch his mouth and mind his own business. He just shrugged and gave a wry smile. Then one night, things started to get weird. Richard and the girl came, but they stayed longer than usual. Around 3 a.m., only Richard came out. He placed the key on the counter. "She'll be out later. I have to go." I didn't pay much attention and went back to my work. A moment later, Marcus suddenly pulled me into a hidden corner. He looked excited. "I have something to confess to you." I hid a small camera in the bathroom of that room. I was shocked. "Marcus, are you crazy?" "I know, but that girl is too hot. I swear this is just a one-time thing," Marcus said as he quickly worked on his phone. The screen showed a black and white image from the hidden camera. It started with the girl walking into the bathroom. I won't describe the next images. Both Marcus and I watched with great focus. A loud thud sounded. It was followed by a painful scream, then silence. The girl had slipped. We saw it clearly. A dark liquid started to flow from her head. It spread quickly. Dr. Richard ran in. He found the girl lying motionless on the bathroom floor. But instead of calling an ambulance, he stood still for a few minutes. He just stared as if he was thinking about something. What happened next will haunt us for the rest of our lives. Richard took out medical tools. He sat down next to the girl. He gently cut her into small pieces, and then he ate some of those pieces. There is no way to describe our feelings. With calmness, he slowly ate little by little. After a while, he continued to eat the internal organs. Marcus was frozen. I don't remember how many times I threw up. Finally, I crawled to the phone on the counter to call the police. 2 police officers arrived a few minutes later. After watching the video, they immediately blocked off the room. They also called for backup and a crime scene investigation team. They searched the room with luminol. They found traces of blood under the bathroom floor, even though it had been thoroughly cleaned. What was even more surprising was that the remaining body parts were neatly arranged in the refrigerator. The head, with its wide-open eyes, and the golden hair that once impressed me, were now smeared with dried blood. Dr. Morrison was arrested the next morning at his clinic. At the police station, according to the detective, Dr. Morrison confessed everything. They had met on an online dating site. On that fateful night, the girl slipped in the bathroom and suffered a head injury. But she didn't die right away. If she had gotten help in time, she could have lived. Dr. Morrison said he panicked. He didn't dare to call 911 because he was afraid his affair would be exposed. That would cause his career, family, and reputation to fall apart. In his desperation, he chose to hide the evidence by getting rid of the body himself in a way no one could have ever imagined, the detective explained to us. After the incident, the Riverside Motel was temporarily closed. Marcus and I were forced to testify in court. Dr. Richard, who was once respected by the whole town, had to go to trial. He was charged with hiding a death and desecrating a corpse. I've never stopped thinking about that blonde woman. Now that I look back, I'm not sure what makes me more uncomfortable. The images of what Richard did, or the fact that I was an accessory to a sick person. My great-grandmother used to tell me a strange story about something she experienced when she was young. At the time, she was married with 4 children. Her family lived in the small town of Quartzsite, Arizona. One afternoon, she was cleaning the farm. Her sister, Eliza, went out to get water from the creek. Their 2 families lived together in the sparsely populated and dangerous American West. Suddenly, the family dogs started to bark fiercely outside. Normally, they were very gentle and rarely barked for no reason. She went to the porch to see what was happening. She saw them barking at a large sand dune in front of the house. Then she saw a huge creature. It had 4 legs and red fur. Its back was twisted. It appeared on top of the dune and came down toward her house. On the back of the creature was a man, but he didn't look normal. His face was horrible and gaunt. His mouth was stretched into a wide smile, and he had no eyes. As a very religious person, she immediately thought it was the devil. He was riding a red creature to come and take her and her family. She ran into the house. She blocked the door with a kitchen table. She gathered her 4 children and prayed. While she was praying, she heard a sharp, terrified scream from outside. She realized it was Eliza's voice. Even though she was terrified and worried about her sister, she didn't dare to go outside. She had to protect her children. A few hours later, the husbands came back from herding sheep. She cried as she told them about the devil and Eliza's disappearance. The 2 men immediately grabbed their guns and oil lamps and went to look for her. They found Eliza near the creek. She was lying face down on the ground. Blood was everywhere. Eliza's body looked like it had been trampled to death. There were many large hoof prints around. My great-grandfather rode his horse into town to tell the sheriff. When the investigator arrived at the scene, he confirmed that Eliza had been trampled to death. The hoof prints left on the ground were too big to be from any horse. My great-grandmother told them the story about seeing the devil and the red-furred creature. But the investigators didn't believe the part about the devil. In the end, Eliza's cause of death was recorded as unknown. From then on, the story of the devil spread throughout the Arizona frontier. People named it the Red Demon. At first, most people didn't believe it was true. They thought it was just a rumor or an exaggeration. However, over time, reports of seeing the Red Demon became more frequent and stranger. She heard many campers say that the red ghost had trampled on their tents. One cowboy claimed to have caught it with his lasso around its neck. But the red ghost ran so hard that it dragged him and forced him to let go. After Eliza's death, she looked out the window one day and saw the Red Demon standing in her turnip garden. My great-grandfather decided he would shoot it dead if he had the chance. After many days of waiting, they saw the red ghost once again. My great-grandfather immediately grabbed his rifle and fired shot after shot at the red ghost until it fell. When they ran out to check, they realized that all the stories about this creature were wrong. The creature was not a monster. It was a camel. It had red fur, a long neck, and a hump on its back. The rider was not the devil. It was the decomposing corpse of a man. The flesh and eyes had rotted off his face. This made him look like he had no eyes and had a wide smile. They didn't know who the man was. They also didn't know how he died. The strange thing was that even though he was dead, his body was still sitting upright on the camel's back. He never fell off. This is what created the scary image of a devil. It wasn't until many years later that people started to understand the truth. The U.S. Army had brought camels to the west from the Mediterranean region to transport goods across the desert. But the U.S. Army was not familiar with how to care for and manage them. The outbreak of the Civil War also caused the project to be abandoned. The camels were either released or sold. Some still existed in the wild in the American Southwest desert. For the people of Arizona at the time, who had never seen these animals outside of books, it was not surprising that they mistook a camel for a monster. My great-grandmother said that from that day on, she no longer believed that all scary things came from hell. Sometimes, it's people and forgetfulness that create the most terrifying ghosts. She lived the rest of her life with regret for not running out when she heard her sisters scream. But deep down, she still believed she had done the right thing to protect her children. And every time she retold the story, she would look far away and say softly, "There are some things that look like a devil, but are really just the consequence of a quiet, lonely death in the desert. My name is Alex. I grew up in the quiet town of Ardmore, Pennsylvania. There wasn't much to do there, so finding something fun was always a challenge. When I was in high school, my 3 friends and I often snuck into old abandoned buildings to explore. It was something we loved to do. It wasn't until many years later that I realized that urban exploration is actually a pretty common thing. There was an abandoned church in town that we had visited a few times before. It was creepy, but it was our go-to spot whenever we were looking for a thrill late at night. One chilly fall evening, the air was cool and crisp. We decided to visit the church and have a few drinks inside. The church was behind an 8-foot-high chain-link fence, so we had to climb over it. All of the doors were boarded up, so we always had to enter through a side window. When we got inside, the first thing we noticed was that the floor was strange. The first floor was just dirt, like someone had removed all of the floorboards a long time ago. It left a deep hole in the middle with concrete steps leading down to the basement. We always hung out in that basement. The basement had 3 rooms, but only one had a door. The other 2 were just door frames. The first room we entered was the biggest. There wasn't much in it besides a few old pieces of furniture, broken chairs, and a tattered couch. I remember having to remind my friend Max to be quiet at least a dozen times because he was drunk and getting loud. Still, being in a group was an advantage, and I felt safer knowing there were a few of us together. We drank and laughed as usual. We may have even had music playing, but I don't remember clearly. Then suddenly a door slammed shut. The sound was so loud it startled me. We froze, looking at each other nervously. At first I thought maybe one of us had accidentally closed the door, or that it was just the wind, but nobody was close to it. Immediately, my friends Luna and Allie panicked and took off. They flew up the stairs, leaving me and Max behind. I didn't want to leave right away. My heart was pounding, I admit, but I didn't want to let the sound scare me. Max looked at my friends leaving, then looked at me, and gave me a silly smile. I knew he was just drunk, not brave. After a few minutes of standing in silence, we decided to investigate. I tiptoed to the door that had just slammed shut and opened it. Behind it was a small room. Max walked past me and went into the room with a carefree look on his face, as if nothing was strange. He touched a dusty wooden table and shook his head, then even sat down in a chair next to it, relaxing as if he were in a familiar place. I walked in and looked around. Besides the table and chairs, there was a wooden shelf. On it was a mirror with some red stains on the surface. At first I thought it was old paint or something similar, but when I got closer, I noticed something horrifying. They weren't completely dry. The stains were still sticky. I felt the hair on my arms stand up and started to regret not leaving sooner. Clearly someone or something had been in this room recently. Then I saw an old photo on the shelf. It was a black and white picture of a woman in a wedding dress. I backed away, and just as I turned, I heard another sound. This time, it wasn't a door. It was coming from one of the other rooms, the big room in the basement that we had just left. At this point, I decided it was time to leave. I quickly grabbed our stuff and pulled Max out of there as fast as I could. He was just a body moving, but his mind was asleep, and it took a lot of effort to pull him. I took a deep breath and slapped Max hard to get him to wake up. Then I pushed him to go first. Luna and Allie were still outside waiting for us. When I climbed over the fence and put my feet on the sidewalk, none of us said a word. Before we left, I looked back, and I swear I saw a person's silhouette standing in the open window frame. I still pray that by some small chance my mind was playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. I never went back to that church again. Many years later, I went back and found that the church had been completely demolished. I still can't find an explanation for what happened that night. I'm glad my friends were there to witness it with me. If I had been alone, I would have doubted the whole thing. 3 weeks have passed since that night. But every time I close my eyes, I see that rugged face pressed against my car window. I'm Mason, 21, and a junior at Ohio University. It all started on a day in late October. I went to my classmate Jake's house to finish a final project that was due soon. I lived in an apartment in town. Jake lived with his parents in a small log cabin on the side of a hill outside of town. To get there, I had to drive on a lonely road that wound through old oak forests and abandoned cornfields. We started working at 6 p.m. We were struggling with numbers and spreadsheets. By the time we finished, it was past 10 p.m. Jake suggested that I stay because the drive home at night wasn't very pleasant, but I refused. I had an early class the next morning, and I wanted to sleep comfortably at home. I left Jake's house at about 10:50 p.m. That night, there was no moon. Everything was pitch black. My car's headlights lit up the road ahead, creating a faint tunnel of light between the dark shadows of the trees. I drove carefully. I kept my speed around 30 miles an hour. The road was full of potholes and uneven. I was afraid of damaging a tire. I estimated I had gone about 5 miles from Jake's house when I came to a sharp left turn on the side of the hill. The dense trees on both sides blocked my view of what was ahead. I slowed down and slowly took the turn. As soon as I got through the turn, I was startled. I slammed on my brakes. A pickup truck was parked diagonally across the road, completely blocking my way. My car stopped about 20 feet from the pickup truck. I could see a small camping tent set up in the bed of the truck. On both sides of the road were deep drainage ditches. I couldn't drive around it. Through the windshield, I saw a person in the cabin. The person had their head down on the steering wheel. They looked like they were unconscious. My first thought was to get out and see if I could help. But as soon as I reached for the car door handle, I stopped. I looked at the situation again. The way the pickup truck was parked was too perfect for a roadblock. It wasn't tilted to one side like after an accident. It was parked at a calculated angle, leaving no room for another car to pass. I remembered the stories that Jake used to tell me about robberies on lonely roads in this area. There were people who faked an accident to trick kind people into stopping to help. I muttered a curse. My hand was shaking as I put the car in reverse. I decided to go back to Jake's house to call the police. If someone really was in trouble, the police and an ambulance would handle it better than I could. As I slowly backed up, my eyes kept darting between the rearview mirror and the front to keep an eye on the pickup truck. I needed to find a spot wide enough to turn around. Suddenly, the man in the pickup truck looked up. At that moment, the back of the pickup truck started making noise. 1, 2, then 3 men jumped out of the camping tent. All 4 of them started running toward me. The blood in my body froze. My foot stomped on the gas pedal. My car sped backward. I found a slightly wider spot on the side of the road. It was the entrance to an old field. I turned the wheel hard to turn around. The wheels hit a tree stump, but at this point, I didn't care. I kept pressing the gas. When I shifted into drive, the first man had already run to the passenger door. He yanked on the door handle. I saw his face. I could tell he was a heavy drug addict. Luckily, I always have a habit of locking my car doors as soon as I get in. He grunted and ordered me to open the door. He punched the window hard. I floored it. The engine roared. The car shot forward. I saw another man run up and try to block the front of the car. But I didn't slow down. He had to jump to the side to avoid being hit. In the rearview mirror, I saw all four of them running after my car. But of course, they couldn't keep up. The last thing I saw was them standing in the middle of the road, watching the back of my car disappear into the night. My heart was pounding like a drum. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I was afraid I would see their headlights appear behind me. I pounded on the door to wake up Jake's family. When I told them what had just happened, Jake's face turned pale. Jake's dad asked me if I had called the police. I shook my head. My phone didn't have service. Jake's dad called. While waiting for the police to arrive, I sat on the sofa in the living room, still trembling. Jake's mom made me a cup of hot tea. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. I told them the whole story from beginning to end. The police officer said that Road had a bad history. Last year there were a few similar incidents, but the police still hadn't caught the robbers. The police then went to the road to check. There was no one there. Only a few tire tracks on the road were the only evidence. I stayed at Jake's house that night. Jake's mom made up a bed for me in the living room. His dad even lent me a shotgun to protect myself if I needed it. He said they didn't know if those guys had followed me. It was better to be safe than sorry. 3 weeks have passed since that terrifying night. Even though the police have increased patrols on that lonely road, and I have chosen a different route to Jake's house, the horrifying event still left a scar on my mind. Every time I close my eyes, the rugged face of the stranger still appears clearly. He haunts me as if he's still pressed against my car window. My car was repaired for almost $300. I consider that a small price to pay compared to what worse things could have happened that night. From this incident, I learned a valuable lesson about being cautious, especially when I have to go out alone at night. My name is Michael. I was 10 years old at the time. I was living in a small town outside of Denver, Colorado. My sister Katie was 2 years younger than me. She was a little girl with brown hair, sparkling eyes, and a bright smile. Katie was always an energetic child. She loved to explore and was especially obsessed with puppies. We loved to stay with our grandma on the weekends. She always gave in to our every wish. That weekend, my grandma took us to Chuck E. Cheese in the evening as she had promised. We had been there for a while when it started to rain pretty hard outside. But inside, everything was fine. We did all the usual kid things. We ate pizza, jumped in the ball pit, and even argued a little. My grandma sat at a nearby table with her salad and a romance novel. She didn't seem to mind us at all. We were playing skee-ball. It's a classic arcade game right next to the main glass doors that looked out onto the parking lot. From there, we could see everything outside. At that time, we noticed a man wearing a baseball cap, dark sunglasses, and a coat. He kept walking back and forth outside in the rain and was holding a small dog. Katie loved dogs. For the past few months, she had been begging our parents to get a dog. So when she saw that cute dog through the glass, she jumped up and down with excitement. The man smiled at us through the glass door. Katie waved back happily. He pointed to the dog and then motioned for us to come outside. We looked over at our grandma's table. She was still engrossed in her novel. She was completely unaware of what was happening around her. So, we opened the door ourselves and walked out. We started to pet the small dog. It licked our hands in a friendly way. The man smiled softly and said, "Hey, he has a few siblings. Do you want to meet them?" Katie looked up with bright eyes. "Really?" We nodded excitedly. "They're in my car over there," he said. The man finished talking and stood up. He walked toward his car. We started to follow him across the parking lot, but after just a few steps, he suddenly stopped. There's just one problem. They don't like boys. I stood there, confused and a little embarrassed by what he said. Whenever boys are around, they bite and get very nervous. You don't want that, right? We were silent. Then we looked at each other. I looked at Katie, my little sister. Her brown eyes were still sparkling with excitement. Then I naively replied, my voice shaking, I guess not. Good. Then you go back inside and play. She'll be back in a few minutes. Katie followed the man alone. I stood there watching her. Katie disappeared behind the other cars. I was about to go back inside the store when a sharp scream came from the distance. It was Katie's scream for help. I was stunned for a few seconds. Then I ran into the store faster than ever before. I yelled for my grandma. I was sobbing and said a man took Katie and that she was screaming for help. I pointed toward the entrance. My grandma immediately went with a security guard from Chuck E. Cheese in the direction I pointed. My grandma yelled Katie's name. The security guard ran in the direction of the sound. Finally, we found Katie struggling and crying next to a gray van. The man saw us and panicked. He ran away and left Katie. The security guard chased after him, but he jumped into his car and sped away into the rainy night. Katie ran into my grandma's arms. Her whole body was shaking. I hugged Katie. The three of us stood in the rain, shaking but grateful that everything had ended well. The police arrived later. They took our statements and drove us home safely. They said that because we noticed in time and Katie was so brave to resist, she was saved. We found out that the small dog had been left behind. 3 weeks later, thanks to the security camera footage and our statements, the police arrested the kidnapper. My parents, after hearing the story, decided to adopt the small dog. They thought that turning something scary into a good memory would help Katie overcome her fear. We named the dog Lucky. Almost 10 years have passed since that night. I never leave Katie alone anymore. I don't want to give any opportunity for the word regret. My name is Billy. I live with my parents in a small town in Ohio. My family has a tradition of going to a pumpkin patch every fall, and it was always the moment I looked forward to the most all year. 9 years ago, around Halloween, I was 12 years old. My family visited a small pumpkin patch just outside of town. The farm wasn't big, just a few acres with rows of pumpkins, a small shed, and a few old tractors. The pumpkins there were always big, round, and bright orange. My family would go to pumpkin patches like this and handpick the best ones for carving and decorating for Halloween. That year, I saw a big, round pumpkin with a smooth surface, but I didn't get it right away. I went to look at more. In the end, I still chose the first pumpkin I saw. My parents were still picking theirs, while I had mine. I rolled it over to the cart. I started to imagine the creepy face I would carve into it, glowing in the Halloween night. When we had all picked our pumpkins, my parents paid, loaded them into the car, and we drove home. When we got home, my mom laid out some old newspapers on the kitchen table and went to get the knife and carving kit. The smell of pumpkin filled the air as my dad started carving his. My mom started gutting hers. I was focused on my pumpkin, eager to begin. I grabbed my knife and started carving the top of the pumpkin like I always did, right around the stem, so I could lift the lid off. Except something strange happened. It was like the top had already been cut and then glued back on. I was confused. I pulled hard on the stem. To my surprise, the top of the pumpkin came right off, as if it had been sealed shut. A rotten smell immediately hit me, and I gagged. My mom noticed my reaction and asked what was wrong. I looked inside the pumpkin, expecting to see some rotten seeds or maybe mold, but what I saw wasn't that simple. Inside the pumpkin, there was something that didn't belong there. It was a hand. At first, I thought it was a joke. Someone had put a fake hand inside for a Halloween scare. Also, the hand looked fake. It looked like a toy you would buy at a dollar store. I gently poked it with the knife. It was soft and felt pretty heavy. My mom came over to see what was going on. The moment she looked inside, she screamed. A real, terrified scream. My dad ran over, grabbed the pumpkin, and looked inside. His face turned pale. "Get out of here. Go outside right now," he said. I didn't dare to argue. I went straight out the back door and sat on the porch. My mind was spinning. My dad called the police. Within half an hour, the house was full of detectives, police officers, and even a forensic team. They blocked off the kitchen and started taking pictures and fingerprints. I remember watching them from the window. Their faces were serious as they handled the pumpkin, as if it were a crime scene. It turned out that the hand inside wasn't fake. It was a real human hand. It had been decomposed and was severed at the wrist. No one knew how long it had been there. The police asked us a million questions. Where did we get the pumpkin? Did we notice anything strange at the farm? Who else touched it? They went back to the pumpkin patch and talked to everyone who worked there. But the worst part was that no one could explain how the hand ended up in the pumpkin. They couldn't identify whose hand it was. No missing person matched it, and no fingerprints came up in their system. The police had a theory that it might be gang-related, maybe a sick message or some kind of ritual, but it was all just speculation. The case went cold and then slowly died down. But for me, that trip to the pumpkin patch ruined Halloween for a long time. Since then, just seeing a pumpkin makes me sick. We never went back to that farm. My parents tried to act like it was just an accident, but I know it left a deep mark on them, just like it haunts me. My mom couldn't stop thinking about how close that hand was to her and me. Sometimes I still think about it, especially when Halloween comes around. When I stand among the pumpkins at the store, I get a shiver. I can even still smell that rotten smell. Since that day, I haven't been able to carve a pumpkin. I just can't do it. I only paint them.